Class changing in 3 houses is actually kind of interesting this time around. If you've played Final Fantasy Tactics or its 2 sequels, it's very much like that. All your students start off as either nobles or commoners, but don't let these titles fool you. They're very much the same thing as the villager class in previous Fire Emblem titles. After studying or fighting, you get to raise your weapon proficiency, and that'll work for you when you get to the actual classes. You can promote to the next year by taking exams, and those exams will require intermediate seals in order to do so. It's unclear how abundant these intermediate seals will be, but that's how class changing will work. You will also not be able to take the exam if the unit has a less than 30% chance at succeeding, and raising your odds of passing is tied to weapon proficiencies from the looks of it. So be sure to plan out accordingly, as this will be the key to your success in building the best army that's ever graced Fodland. Each character has their likes and dislikes alongside budding talents, which grants users additional skills if you can capitalize on their hidden talent. And if the characters have interesting to good personal skills or crests, we've theory crafted optimizations towards those. This video is not concrete, as its aim is to give you ideas on how you can go down certain paths for said characters, so if you have any ideas that you've theory crafted, let me know in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Let's start off with Byleth. Byleth, like other traditional Avatar characters, can become whatever you desire him to be. His main weapon, however, seems to be a sword, so while you can turn him into anything, you should consider his personal weapon being a sword. But don't feel like you're pigeonholed because of this fact. Byleth is the wild card, the jack of all trades, master of all if any of the other Avatar characters were anything to go off of in previous Fire Emblem titles. I will not be commenting any further on Byleth. The first character that we're going to be talking about is Edelgard, who has the personal ability Imperial Lineage, which multiplies the experience earned by 1.2 times. She also has the minor crest of Seros, which sometimes raises might when using combat arts. With this in mind, there are a few paths that you can take. The first and most obvious is probably going to be the noble into fighter into brigand/lord, and finally into the warrior class. This will probably be the most common path that a lot of people will take Edelgard down into due to her starting with the Iron Axe. However, if you do go down this path, know that you will not have the ability to get into the master class of War Master, as it is locked to males only. You'll have to look elsewhere for your master class. The second is Noble into Myrmidon, into Swordmaster, and finally into the Mortal Savant class. The Mortal Savant pathway will not make use of her proficiencies in axes, but will make use of her proficiencies in sword, as well as her budding talent in reason magic. By going down this route, you'll be making use of her pretty decent strength stat while pushing to gain better speed stats if older Myrmidons are anything to go off of. The third path that you can take is Noble into Soldier, into Knight, into Fortress Knight, and finally the Great Knight. The Great Knight line makes use of her proficiencies in heavy armor. I personally, however, wouldn't recommend this path in particular, as you have other characters that could do this, but better in the Black Eagle's house. The fourth line that you can take is Noble into Mage line. She has a budding talent in reason, which may make her a good mage, but she dislikes faith, making the mage route a little bit more of a grind. If you do end up going down this path, she'll likely be your secondary or tertiary healer, second to even those who you recruit outside of your house. And finally, Noble into Fighter, into Wyvern Rider, and into the Wyvern Lord class. She isn't talented in riding, flying, or lances, but it is worth considering if you want Edelgard to go down into a flyer route. Pegasus Knights are just as fine, though I personally feel it's better to take advantage of her high strength with axes as opposed to swords. The next character we're going to be talking about is Edelgard's retainer Hubert, who has the personal ability Officer Duty, which grants him +5 might when using gambits. Hubert does not have a crest, so with this in mind, there are 4 paths that you can consider taking him down. The first is Noble into Monk, into Dark Mage/Mage, into Warlock, and finally into the Dark Knight class. The second path is very similar to the first one, but instead of the Dark Knight class, you end in the Mortal Savant role. Hubert is very comparable to Dorothea in the fact that they both have very similar magic stat lines, but Hubert has very much less charm, meaning he won't be able to make use of a battalion early like Dorothea, and could falter behind in damage at the very start of the game unless you're abusing gambits. However, with his stat line, it makes sense that he goes down a magic class, but we do not know as of right now if Mortal Savant is going to be better going down a mage or sword class, so I decided to include both, just with different routes. The third route that he can take is Noble, into Monk, into Dark Mage/Mage, into Dark Bishop/Bishop, and finally into the Dark Knight class. This route makes use of Hubert as a kind of healer at the start, but ends in the DPS class as a Dark Knight. This makes use of his budding talent and lances as well as making use of his high magic stat. And finally, if you don't have another Cav, you can consider going down the Cav line and in whatever rides a horse. This route will make use of Hubert's budding talent, but we do not know how good his budding talent skill is, so don't bother with this route if his budding talent is bad or even decent. There are better ways to get lance proficiency, so even if this is bonkers, just use the other methods to raise those ranks. The next character we're going to be talking about is Bernadetta, who has the minor crest of Indec, which occasionally allows weapon attack to strike twice, which is very, very good. Personal ability, Persecution Complex, grants attack +5 when unit is not at full HP. With this in mind, there are a few paths that you can consider taking her down into. The first is Noble, into Fighter, into Archer, into Sniper, and finally the Bow Knight. You have to grind swords, but you can capitalize on her budding talent for riding. The difficult part about using Bernadetta will be using her personal ability, which is bonkers in combination with her crest. By going down a Archer/Sniper line, in theory she shouldn't be taking any damage and shouldn't be taking too much damage, but if the game has a lot of mages, this line could prove to be incredibly good. The second is Noble, into Soldier, into the Cavalier, into Paladin, and finally into the Bow Knight class. This path takes advantage of her budding talent a bit better than the Archer/Sniper route, since we get her into Cavalier class by level 10 and we make use of her proficiencies in both lances and bows. Finally, she can go from Noble into Soldier, into Pegasus Knight, and finally into the Falcon Knight class. This line will take advantage of Bernadetta being a flyer opposed to being a cav. It'll take some time to grind out her sword proficiency since she doesn't like using swords, but this will give you the option of having a flyer if you don't have one. The next character we're going to be talking about is Caspar, whose personal ability is Born Fighter. Adjacent foes suffer a void -10 during combat. Caspar also does not have a crest. Before we talk about him going down his path lines, I do want to mention the fact that he's unique in the fact that he doesn't have any budding talents. With Caspar, you can go down either into an axe or brawler based, but you'll always want him to end up being a war master. The benefits, however, will be different, and I'll explain them as I talk about the classes. The first path that you can take Caspar down into is Noble, into Fighter, into Brigand, into Warrior, and finally the War Master. When picking your advanced class, you should only use axes, but once you become a War Master, you can use both again. Skill-wise, Warrior class seems to be more crit-based, heavy damage-based, but won't be doubling, but you should be hitting hard. The second one is Noble, into Fighter, into Brawler, which is male only, Grappler, and finally War Master. Skill-wise, you won't be getting as much HP and crit as the Warrior, but you get a boost in dexterity and better speed than if you would go down the Warrior path. Caspar seems very much pigeonholed into a physical footlock class, but if you do need a rider/flyer, since he is neither efficient or inefficient at riding/flying, you can also go down a Cavalier or Wyvern route since he is proficient in axes. The next character that we're going to be talking about is Dorothea, whose personal ability is Songstress, which reads, adjacent allies recover up to 10% of max HP at the start of each turn. She also does not have a crest. Base stat wise, she looks to be a DPS mage and not a healing mage thanks to her decent speed stat and high magic stat. Her starting charm stat is also really high at 8. She should go down the mage route, starting with Commoner, into Monk, into Mage, into Warlock, and finally ending at Gremmery. She can go down the same path, but instead of ending in Gremmery, she can end in Mortal Savant. Dorothea will be your go-to mage alongside Hubert. The only difference between the two is that Dorothea will have better and higher charm, making it so that building a battalion behind her is easier to do and presumably means that you can make her damage better than Hubert from the start. If the mage route can end up going into the Mortal Savant role, then you want to go down the Myrmidon, Mercenary, and Swordmaster route to get into Mortal Savant, but I don't recommend this. You'll most likely be able to go down into the Mortal Savant class through the mage line. Her fourth option is going from Monk, into Priest, into Bishop, and finally ending in Gremmery. This makes her a healer, but this isn't recommended. It seems Dorothea wants to be a DPS class to take advantage of her using a battalion, which healers I don't think will be able to use a battalion to the highest degree. And finally, Dancer. We don't know how to get the dancer yet, but her ability to heal users at the start of every turn and her backstory being a songstress makes me think that she can be a fantastic dancer, reminiscent of Azura from Fates. The next character we're going to be talking about is Ferdinand, whose personal ability is Confidence, which grants him hit/avoid plus 15 when unit is at full HP. His personal ability is alright, but his crest, Minor Crest Official, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these crests, allows combat arts to sometimes prevent enemy counterattacks. This is very good. This dude is also very good at writing things, but is awful at magic, so try and avoid that. So with this in mind, there are 3 paths that I think most people will take him into. The first is Noble into Soldier, into Cavalier, into Paladin, and finally ending at Great Knight. The second option that you can do is go from Noble into Soldier, into Knight, into Fortress Knight, and finally ending in the Great Knight path. And the third is Noble into whatever rides a horse at the end of the day. You could turn him into anything that rides a horse. He also has a hidden talent in heavy armor, so going down to the Great Knight class would be the most natural for him. Turn him into whatever physical class that you're lacking in your army. He's a flex unit in the sense that you already have a lot of magic units in the squad. So his 4th and 5th options are relatively similar, starting with Noble, Myrmidon, Mercenary, and ending at Hero. The 5th option is, instead of Hero, you turn him into a Swordmaster. If you don't need any more characters that rides a horse, Ferdinand is actually great at being both a hero and Swordmaster, or both. So keep this option in mind if you have too many horses, but this is Fire Emblem. You can't have too many horse units. The next character we're going to be talking about is Linhardt, whose personal ability is Catnap. If unit takes no action except wait, recovers up to 10% of max HP. His crest, Minor Crest Cethalian, sometimes raises might when using recovery magic. With this in mind, I think there are about 3 different paths that you should consider when using Linhardt. The first path is Noble into Monk into Priest and finally into Bishop. The second path is Noble into Monk into Mage and then finally into Dark Bishop, while the third path, Noble, Monk, Mage, Warlock into Dark Knight, is a little bit more offensive and requires a little bit more work since you have to take Linhardt into Lance/Writing proficiencies. Linhardt is probably your best healer in the Black Eagle's house. While you can go down an offensive path with Linhardt, it's recommended that you maximize on healing to take use of both his crest and ability in Catnap. You also have 2 other great DPS mages in Hubert and Dorothea, so Linhardt would probably make sense being a healer. And the final character that we're going to be talking about in the Black Eagle's house is Petra, whose personal ability is Hunter's Boon, which grants critical plus 20 when foe's HP is less than 50%. Petra also does not have a crest. Petra looks to be your token Myrmidon character, but you can go down the flyer route if needed. She's also proficient in axes like all the other characters in the Black Eagle's house, so it's recommended that you keep her using swords opposed to axes. The first option that you can take her down into is Noble, into Myrmidon, Mercenary, Swordmaster, and finally ending in the Mortal Savant class. This seems to be the most obvious route that you can take her on, but if you don't want obvious, here are a few more options. Her second is Noble into Fighter into Brigand, and finally ending at Warrior, and her third option is Noble, Fighter, Brigand into Wyvern Knight, and finally the Wyvern Lord. Like Ferdinand, she's kind of your flex in physical classes. Turn her into whatever physical class you're lacking with the exception to Brawler, because she won't be able to take full advantage of that weapon type. So with that being said, number 4, turn her into whatever uses a sword, lance, or axe. With this in mind, here's a sample team that I just randomly threw together. Because the Black Eagles have a ton of magic units, your flex units Petra and Ferdinand have to fill whatever physical role is left between your main cast of characters. I recommend turning Ferdinand into a Cavalier class, as the Black Eagles can lack Cavalier characters, while Petra should continue focusing on her speed by going down into either the Swordmaster class for more offense or Pegasus Knights for more utility. Moving on to the Blue Lions, we're going to be talking about the house leader of the Blue Lions himself, Dimitri. Dimitri rocks the personal ability, Royal Lineage, which multiplies experience earned by 1.2 times. He also sports the minor crest of Bleed, which occasionally doubles attack and weapon uses for combat arts. I also apologize in advance that I mispronounced the crest name. I think Dimitri has 4 different routes that are worth consideration. The first is Noble into Myrmidon into Mercenary, and finally ending in Swordmaster/Hero. The second option is Noble, Soldier, Lord, Paladin, and then Great Knight, but that requires axes that you have to learn through proficiency. And third is Noble, Cav, Paladin into Great Knight. Very similar to the first path, but instead going down the Cavalier line. And finally, it's Noble, Soldier, Knight, Fortress Knight, and finally ending in Great Knight. Dimitri is a great physical lord that sports great offenses, who can make use of being on a horse. He's your token physical lord that's awfully reminiscent of characters like Ephraim and Ike, so be sure to keep him locked up to using physical weapons like swords, axes, and lances when you can. Upon promotion, he should be going down into a class that rides horses, but don't let that limit you, as being a swordmaster or hero are also perfectly fine options. Moving on to the retainer of the Blue Lions, it's Dedue, whose personal ability is Staunch Shield. If unit takes no action except wait, grants defense +4 for 1 turn. Dedue does not have a crest. With this in mind, I think there are 4 different ways that you can consider him. The first one is Commoner into Soldier, into Armored Knight, into Fortress Knight, and finally ending in Great Knight. Thanks to his personal skill Staunch Shield, it becomes obvious that Dedue wants to be in a tanky class, or a class that boasts a lot of health. And what better class to do that than the Armored Knight class, which boasts high health and defense historically in the Fire Emblem franchise. Being in this class will make Dedue want to hold choke points, which is perfect in small maps. Great Knights require heavy armor and not riding, so Dedue's final master class should be in the Great Knight class. However, that isn't the only option for Dedue. You can go down from Commoner into Fighter, into Brigand, into Warrior, and finally end in War Master, or Commoner, Fighter, Brawler, Grappler, and end in War Master, or Commoner, Fighter, Mercenary, Hero, and then into War Master. By going down the War Master route, you'll be taking advantage of his offensive capabilities. While you sacrifice defense, you'll be getting a decent amount of health plus offensive capabilities. I recommend going down the Warrior route opposed to the Brawler route to min-max on strength and having him be a one-hit wonder. You can even dip into the hero class to get the Vantage skill if that's something you want, though you have to raise proficiencies in sword, which is something he neither likes or dislikes. The next character we're going to be talking about is Annette, whose personal ability, Perseverance, is use Rally to grant strength 4 to an ally. She also has the minor crest of Dominic, occasionally conserves use of attack magic. So with this in mind, I think there are 2 obvious paths that you can take Annette down into. The first is Noble into Monk into Priest into Bishop, and finally Gremory/Holy Knight. And second, it's Noble, Monk, Mage, Warlock into Gremory. Annette seems to fill the role of healer and magic user for Blue Lions. Going a priest route would make her use of high magic and allow her to support her allies with her personal skill. Her crest also favors a mage or priest route, seeing as the Blue Lions lack magic, making Annette a mage and Mercedes a healer would also allow for more magic and healing in the house. Holy Knight would be her master class if she were a healer, and Gremory if she has been using a magic damage class the entire time. Her 2 other options that is worth consideration is Noble, Fighter, Brigand, Warrior, and Noble, Fighter, Brigand into Wyvern Rider/Wyvern Lord. Annette also favors Axes, which allows her to utilize a Warrior or Wyvern class, although it isn't recommended due to her likely low strength stats and growths. She can also be your dancer, as Annette has viabilities as a dancer due to her magic and authority efficiency. The next character we're going to be talking about is Ashe, whose personal ability is Lockpick, allows units to open doors and chests without keys. Ashe does not have a crest. With this in mind, I think there are 3 very obvious options that you can consider taking him down into. First is Commoner into Fighter, into Archer, into Sniper, and finally in Bow Knight. Second is Commoner, Myrmidon, Thief, Assassin into Bow Knight, and third it's Commoner, Soldier, Cavalier, Paladin, and then into Bow Knight. Blue Lions is unique in the fact that you can go without having a Thief class, but Ashe's stat line seems to favor him being a Thief, so it's your call. At the end of the day, you do want Ashe to go down into the Bow Knight route, if possible, to make use of his proficiencies and bows, plus his budding talent in lances. But if you do not like any of these options, the 4th route is Commoner into Fighter, into Brigand, into Warrior, and finally into War Master. By going down the Warrior line into War Master, it makes use of his proficiencies and axes, but doesn't make use of anything else besides that. You can dip into classes to pick up skills, but it's recommended that you stick with the other classes if at all possible. The next character we're going to be talking about is Felix, whose personal ability is Lone Wolf. Unit deals 5 extra damage when no battalion is assigned or when endurance is 0. He also sports the crest of Fradalrius, sometimes raises might when using a weapon. I again butchered the name of the crest, so I apologize in advance. With this in mind, however, I do think Felix has a few options on what he wants to be. The first is Noble into Myrmidon, into Mercenary, into Swordmaster, ending in Mortal Savant. The second is Noble into Fighter, into Thief, into Assassin, and then ending in Mortal Savant. Generally, you want to end into the Mortal Savant to make use of his budding talent in Reason Magic and keep his proficiencies in swords. His stat line seems to suggest going down a mercenary-like path, but you can also go down the Assassin route if you want another lockpick user on your team. The third option for Felix is Noble, Fighter, Brawler, Grappler, and finally ending at War Master. The Brawler route will take advantage of his Fist proficiency, but that's about the only advantage that you get from going down this path. And finally, you can go from Noble into Myrmidon, into Mercenary, into Hero, and end in Mortal Savant. Just be sure to level Axes when you can. But by leveling Axes, you get access to the Vantage skill which the Hero provides. You can also dip into Hero for a short bit and go back into Swordmaster if that's something you want to do, only to pick up Vantage. The next character that we're going to be tackling is Ingrid, whose personal ability is Lady Knight. Grants Might +3 and Hit +5 when using Gambits. Her crest, Minor Crest of Daphnel, sometimes raises Might when using combat arts. With this in mind, I think there are 3 different considerations that you can take. First is Noble into Soldier and going down into the Falcon Knight line. The second is Noble into Soldier, into Cavalier, into Paladin, and finally ending in a Master class that rides a horse. And third is Noble into Myrmidon, into Mercenary, into Swordmaster, and finally ending in Mortal Savant. However, don't let this stop you. Ingrid is a character whose stat line looks to be pretty flat throughout, making her a great jack of all trades, master of none type character. Her proficiencies reflect this train of thought as she only has preferred skills and no dislike skills. However, in the trade of all this, she doesn't have a budding talent, so whatever you're lacking in your squad, you can turn Ingrid into that. Though I recommend keeping her a strength-based class over a magic-based one just based on her base stats. She's a great flex unit that should be rounding out your team, so plan for Ingrid last. The next character we're going to be talking about is Mercedes, whose personal ability is Live to Serve. When healing an ally with white magic, unit recovers the same amount of HP. She also has the minor crest of Lamine, which occasionally conserves uses of recovery magic. With this in mind, I think the first 2 options are very obvious, which is going down Commoner, into Monk, into Priest, into Bishop, and finally ending at Gremory. In the second route, instead of finishing in Gremory, you end in Holy Knight. Overall, Mercedes is your token healer with a personal ability like Live to Serve, and her having the minor crest that preserves healing. But with a high base stat in magic, don't let that stop you from classing her into a mage class if you need more offensive characters in your army. Gremory will most likely be the last class you dip into since it'll be easier to get into than the Holy Knight, which indicates needing 3 skills, Lance's Riding, and Faith Magic. Her third option, like I indicated earlier, is a more DPS route, which goes from Commoner into Mage into Warlock and finally ending at Gremory. By going down this route, that means you're already dead set on using another healer within the Blue Lion's house. It'll be better to keep her in a healing based class opposed to an offensive based path to make use of her abilities though. And finally, Commoner into Fighter, into Archer, into Sniper, and ending at Bow Knight. But this is not recommended as she dislikes bows, yet has a budding talent for it. The only reason you want to raise her proficiencies in bows is if her budding talent skill is insane and breaks the game. If it is mediocre at best, you're probably best spending your time elsewhere. And finally, from the Blue Lion's house, it's everyone's favorite womanizer, Sylvain, whose personal ability reads Philanderer. If a female ally is in an adjacent tile, deal 2 extra damage and take 2 less damage during combat. He also has the minor crest of Gautier, which occasionally allows weapon attacks to strike twice. I again apologize for all the butchering of the crest names. With this in mind, I think there are 4 different paths that are worth consideration. First is the Noble into Soldier into Cav into the Paladin line, and the second is going from Paladin into Great Knight, though it means that you have to level his axes and heavy armor proficiencies. His third option is Noble into Soldier into Knight into Fortress Knight and finally ending at Great Knight, though you don't make use of his riding proficiency and you want him to be someone who can move around the battlefield for the ladies. Fourth is Noble into Soldier, into Cavalier, into Paladin, and ending in Dark Knight. Overall, Sylvain is best as someone who's offensive and rides a horse, or in the Dark Knight class to take advantage of his budding talent and reason. It is recommended that you try and get him into the Dark Knight class since it's relatively easy as he is proficient in everything else and would have to optimize his budding talent and reason magic when it comes to teaching him. His fifth option is going in Noble, Monk, Dark Magic, Warlock, though it isn't recommended unless you're going all in on his budding talent, and we aren't even sure if his skill that he obtains from going down said path is even good. Because of the abundance in physical units that you get, it is recommended that you try and yoink students from other houses that are good at reason magic. While Sylvain does have the budding talent in reason magic, going all in on his budding talent actually hurts where he's actually talented in, which is everything else. Dancer is also a hard choice, but Annette or Ingrid would work well. Annette favors authority and Ingrid is a flexible unit. And finally, we're going to be moving on into the final house, the Golden Deers. Starting with the house leader himself, Claude, whose personal ability is the Lester lineage, which multiplies experience earned by 1.2 times. He also sports the minor crest of Reigen, which sometimes restores HP equal to 30% of damage dealt when using combat arts. With this in mind, I think there are two obvious paths that you can take Claude into, starting with Noble, Fighter, Archer, Sniper, Bow Knight. The secondary path being Noble, Fighter, Lord/Thief, Assassin, and finally ending in Bow Knight. Thanks to his trickster-like personality, it works that he's your quote Bow Lord. His proficiency in riding makes him a great Bow Knight by the end of both these routes, if that's something that you're interested in. His third route is Noble, Fighter, into Lord/Mercenary, into Hero, and finally whatever master class is available. This path is a little bit more tricky and will require you to plan out a little bit more as you need to plan out ahead for his master class. Otherwise, dipping into Hero and going something else might not be a bad option as well. However, this option will take advantage of his budding talent in axes, though you do drop bows and his proficiency in almost everything else for it. His fourth option is Noble into Fighter, into Wyvern Rider, into Wyvern Lord. This route takes advantage of his budding talent in axes, plus his proficiencies in riding and flying, making him a great candidate for being a Wyvern Lord by the end of the class path. The next character we're going to be talking about is the Golden Deer retainer herself, Hilda, whose personal ability is Advocate. Adjacent male allies deal 3 extra damage during combat. She also sports the minor crest of Gonro, which allows combat arts to sometimes prevent enemy counterattacks. With this in mind, I think there are 2 obvious starts that you can take Hilda down into, which is Noble, Fighter, Knight, Fortress Knight, and finally ending with Great Knight. Her second option being Noble, Fighter, Cavalier, Paladin, and then ending with Great Knight. Hilda is a little bit awkward in the fact that her budding talent is in armor, but her base speed stat seems to indicate her being a little bit fast. Both routes will end up with her being a Great Knight in these routes and will optimize her budding talent and her proficiencies. Her third option is Noble, Fighter, Brigand, Warrior. This path will take use of her proficiency in axes, though it is not recommended that you go down this path. Her fourth and fifth option takes advantage of being a flyer, starting with Noble, Soldier, Peg Knight, Falcon Knight, or Noble, Fighter, Wyvern Rider, Wyvern Lord. Going down the Wyvern Lord path will be better than the Falcon Knight path, but Hilda can be a great flyer if that's something that your team is lacking. Her proficiency in both axes and lance will be used in the Wyvern Lord route, but will only use her proficiency in lances in the Falcon Knight path, but it is worth consideration as she is a female. Her final option is a dancer, but let me address the elephant in the room and say that while yes, Hilda does seem to be sort of the face of dancers, I do not recommend turning Hilda into a dancer. She has no proficiency in either swords or magic, and to optimize her abilities as a character is best spent being a Great Knight than a dancer. However, depending on what skills the dancer class will give, can change this option in the future. We can't have a Fire Emblem school game without the Harry Potter looking character himself, Ignatz, whose personal ability is Watchful Eye, grants hit plus 20. Ignatz also does not have a crest. With a skill like Watchful Eye, I think by default a lot of people will be jumping down into an archer based class, starting with Noble, Fighter, Archer, Sniper, and ending in Bow Knight. His second option is Noble, Fighter, Thief, Assassin, and then finally ending in Bow Knight. With a personal skill like Watchful Eye, Ignatz will make a great archer who can take people out from afar. His proficiency in both swords and bows makes him a fantastic assassin, but don't be afraid to make him a sniper if you want to make use of bigger ranges. Bow Knights will be where he'll most likely be ending in. But another thing is, if Echo's combat arts are anything to go off of, his ability will make him an even better archer, since Echo archers lost accuracy when using combat arts. His third option is Noble into Myrmidon, into Mercenary, into Swordmaster, and finally Mortal Savant. This one will take out the bow proficiency and make use of his budding talent in magic. His end path will be the Mortal Savant class. You can also replace the Swordmaster and go Hero, but that also means that you have to raise Axe proficiency, where he'll end up only using it once. His fourth line is obviously the Mage line, and his fifth line is Dancer. Having a budding talent in magic would also make Ignatz a great mage, but unironically would also make him the best dancer since he's proficient in swords, has budding talent in reason magic, and has great authority. Moving on, the next character that I want to talk about is Leonie, whose personal ability is Rivalry. If a male ally is in an adjacent tile, unit deals 2 extra damage and takes 2 less damage during combat. She also does not have a crest. She has 4 kind of options that you can take: Commoner, Soldier, Pegasus Knight, Falcon Knight, Commoner, Soldier, Cavalier, Paladin, and then ending in a master class that rides a horse, Commoner, Fighter, Archer, Cavalier, Sniper, Paladin, Bow Knight. Honestly, she's your flex unit. If you're lacking something in your army, Leonie can be that fill unit. She doesn't dislike anything and likes 3 different things and can all lead to good/great classes. If you're planning out your team, I suggest planning her out last, but if you do want to optimize her, I recommend either going down into the Falcon Knight class or the Bow Knight Master class to make use of her proficiencies. The next character we're going to be talking about is Lorenz, who has the personal ability Distinguished House. Unit deals 2 extra damage while equipped with the battalion. He also comes equipped with a minor crest of Gloucester, which occasionally raises might during magic attacks. So we're going to start with the less obvious options first, starting with Noble into Soldier, into Cavalier, into Paladin, and finally ending in Great Knight. Lorenz looks like the main Cavalier choice for Yellow Gears, as he is efficient in riding and lances. Ending on a Great Knight would require increasing his armor rating, but it would give him a helpful increase in defenses. His second and third option both end in Bow Knight, but take different paths, starting with Noble, into Soldier, into Cavalier, into Paladin, and ending with Bow Knights. His third option is Noble, into Fighter, into Archer, into Sniper, into Bow Knight. Like most of the Yellow Deer students, Lorenz is also good with the bow. Bow Knights would work well with his previously mentioned riding and lance ranks. Going the Cavalier route into Bow Knight is probably preferred as you utilize both bows, lances, and riding, but going the Archer route isn't a bad choice. Swapping between would also work as long as he has high enough skill ranks. His fourth and fifth options seem to be the most obvious, starting with Noble, Monk, Dark Mage, Warlock, Dark Knight, and his fifth option being what I think is most preferred: Noble, Soldier, Cavalier, Paladin, Warlock, and then finally ending in Dark Knight. Interestingly, Lorenz is somewhat adept in magic, making the masterclass Dark Knight a reasonable fit for him. Similar to Archer, you would need to make the choice between going a Cavalier route or Mage route, and switching between the classes to assist in his growth would likely be the most effective way to balance both his strength and magic growths. Lorenz also has the ability to be somewhat of an average armor knight, although with units like Hilda and Raphael available, this is hardly a fantastic option for him. The next character that I'm going to be talking about is a fan favorite, Lysithea, whose personal ability is Mastermind, which doubles skill experience earned in battle. She also has a minor crest of Sharon and a major crest in the Gloucester bloodline, which sometimes raises might when using combat arts and occasionally raises might during magic attacks. With this in mind, what should I turn Lysithea into? And there's really only one option, and that option is Magic is Everything. I'm not even gonna bother with Lysithea if I was to be honest. To get the best out of her, rush getting proficiencies in magic and turn her into a magic class, and her ability to get double skill experiences in battle will make her a really easy to train unit that'll probably be able to dip into a lot of different classes. However, at the end of the day, just make use of her talent in magic. Just turn her to a magic class. Magic class. I don't think I've said this enough. Turn her into a mage. Wait, if she's Hermione, and Ignatz is Harry Potter, is Raphael Ron? The next character I'm going to be talking about is Marianne, whose personal ability is Animal Friend. Unit recovers up to 20% of max HP at the start of each turn when adjacent to a cavalry or flying ally. Her crest is also a mystery crest, which at this point we're unsure of what it does. With this in mind, I think she has a lot of options that she can take. The first 4 options are going to be all mounted units, starting with Noble, into Soldier, into Peg Knight, into Falco Knight. Her second option is Noble, Soldier, Cavalier, Paladin, Holy Knight. Her third option being Noble, Fighter, Wyvern Rider, Wyvern Lord, and her fourth option, Noble, Fighter, Archer, Sniper, Bow Knight. With her budding talent being in Lance, it isn't actually a waste of time going down the Soldier line to get a riding class. At first, it might be a struggle since you aren't really taking advantage of her high magic stat, but you get a nice and good skill out of going into her budding talent route. She wants to always end up being on an animal for whatever route you decide to take, so take advantage of her proficiency in being both a good rider and flyer. Her 5th, 6th, and 7th options also kind of dip into that, but with a more magic focus. Starting with Noble, into Mage, into Warlock, and finally ending in Dark Knight, or the same path but ending in Gremray. She also can become your healer, going Noble, Monk, Priest, Bishop, and ending in Holy Knight. The other routes you can take are basically, like I said earlier, a mage-focused class, or specifically a healing-based class to make her use of high magic stat and her proficiency in faith magic. Her best class will always be Holy Knight since it makes use of her 2 proficiencies as well as her budding talent and lances, but don't let that stop you from making her into a unit that's just good at riding an animal. When I said Lysithea was the fan favorite, I lied, because this guy is everyone's fan favorite, and that's Raphael. His personal ability, Goodie Basket, gives him a chance to recover up to 10% of his max HP at the start of every turn, the trigger percentage being his luck stat. And with him sporting a high base stat in attack, I think there are 2 main options for a lot of people to consider. The first being the War Master path, starting with Commoner, into Fighter, into Brigand, going into Warrior/Hero, and ending in War Master. The second one being the Brawler based one, going from Commoner, Fighter, Brawler, Grappler, and ending in War Master. This is the obvious route. I recommend seeing Caspar's explanation to see which one is better, but I recommend going down the Warrior/Hero route for Raphael, so he can just be this one big hit wonder. I recommend staying with the Warrior class route since you'd have to raise his proficiencies in swords, but if you end up doing that, you can pick up Vantage from the Hero class, which Raphael will greatly appreciate. His third option is going down a more tankier route, starting with Commoner, into Fighter, into Knight, into Fortress Knight, and ending in Great Knight. Raphael also likes wearing heavy and bulky armor, making him a great armor knight for your team. His proficiency in axes and heavy armor makes him right at home in the Fortress Knight line, since you don't need riding to get him into the Great Knight class. His fourth option, and just take this into consideration, is Pope Raphael. Something to consider besides the god that is Pope Raphael is that again, you have a ton of physical units on this team, so be on the lookout for ways to expand past these physical units and have a few mages on the squadron besides Lysithea. With a lot of bulk on this team, and with a lot of characters being easily able to go into Armored Knight/Wyvern Lord classes, is picking up additional healers for this team to help their bulk even further. Either way, I hope this speculation can give you an idea on how to tackle class changing in Fire Emblem Three Houses. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a like and consider subscribing for more Fire Emblem content. This has been JaeAIK, and as always, thanks for watching.